I have finished painting the tank, the yellowish tan color. And that approximates the color that a Panzer III came out of the factory in Germany after they painted over that red primer. And of course, using the airbrush, it's all on there nice and smooth. But we're gonna mess that up now because we're gonna weather the tank like if it's been in combat and people have been climbing all over it. To do that, we'll use a shish kebab stick there. There was a YouTube video I saw that said that's a good tool to use when you're weathering and scratching up one of these tanks. And then also a stiff bristle brush, paintbrush. And you get the very tips of those wet, not very much water at all, I found. And then you just start working away at wearing down parts of the tank where people would walk or drag a metal box across. And you can see how I've done this side here. I used the bristle brush in big, large areas, like right in there. And then I used the, bamboo skewer stick there to make scratches, such as the ones on the back of the tank here. I started working on this weld right there and scratching it up as well as the weld around the back. And you can see how that makes those welds look much more realistic to have them kind of chipped up like that. I have not done these areas on this side of the top of the tank, so you can really contrast the difference of how this looks here compared to how this looks over here, as far as the realism goes. So I'm gonna keep on weathering the tank, and I'll be back in a few minutes and show you how it all came out. I have finished chipping and scraping and scratching and rubbing the tank on the top, sides, and bottom, and came out pretty good. You can see on the back here by these engine covers where I've chipped those out. Very realistic. On top of the turret and in the crew storage box here, I used that bristle brush, the wide one, with a tiny bit of water on the tip, and just went over and just very gently would rub on the yellow paint until I exposed the paint underneath it, simulating that the crew was, walking on top of the tank there, for quite a while, or had been storing stuff there that wore it down. The welds that I put on the tank using that styrene rod that then I kind of sliced up with the razor knife, remember? And then of course I painted those, but now I've chipped those up and worn those. And they look very realistic now. On the front of the tank here, next to the driver's window and the machine gun port, I also used that bristle brush to wear down areas. You can really see the contrast between chipping up and scratching up a model like this versus just leaving it painted nice and clean by looking at these two doors. The one on the right has been scratched up and chipped out, but the one on the left has not. It looks like it would have looked when it just came out of the factory brand new. And I'll chip up that left one as well. But if this tank had been in combat, that's the way the door, inside the door would look, not like that. I also chipped up and scratched up the areas where the tracks are and the wheels. And of course, these areas would really be messed up due to all the rocks and grass and dirt that would be thrown all up against the paint and really chip it up a lot. I experimented with a pen wash, And if you want to make a pen wash, you can take some oil-based paint, like this brown paint here, and take just a very small amount of it, like maybe just like the very tip here, you know, in front of my thumb, just a very small, tiny bit of it. Put it in a mixing dish, and then put in about a thimble or so of enamel thinner, not acrylic paint thinner, but enamel thinner. And you're gonna have to mix that up for quite a while to get it to dissolve. But once you do, and you get kind of an even, real watery mixture, you'll be ready to apply that pen wash. And if you take a brush like this and get a little bit of it on there and put it on a paper towel, and it just kind of spreads out real quickly, and it's a very light brown, you'll know you're about right. But you'll have to experiment with it for a while. And that's what I did, because it was the first time I had ever used a pen wash. And I experimented on the bottom of the tank because I knew that would be kind of out of sight. And if I messed up, nobody'd be able to really see it. But if you take a look at the sets of 4 bolts next to each wheel arm, you can see where I applied that pen wash. And I would just touch the brush to the bolts, and you can see how the pen wash would then spread out and kind of form a greasy type look around the bolt. You can also take a look at this small cross there about the center of the screen. I just touched that pen wash to the base of that cross, and it just spread out around the base on the circumference of that little cross. When you contrast that, kind of a dirty looking area there, compared to where this rectangle and circular cover are, you can really see the difference between what the pen wash does. You can also take a look at those 4 bolts right there compared to how clean this looks. So I'll be applying the pen wash to that rectangle and that circular cover there as well, just to add some realism, because the bottom of the tank would definitely be very dirty. So I'm going to mix up some of the pen wash, and I'm going to apply it now to the top of the tank, touching just a tiny little bit of it to the bolts and other protrusions on top of the tank. And once I'm done with that part of the weathering process, I'll be back and we'll see how it came out. I have finished applying the pen wash to the top surfaces of the tank. And if you look at those 8 bolts just above the main gun barrel on that armor plate, you can see how by touching a very fine brush to the top of each of those bolts, how the pen wash just runs around the base of them and leaves that kind of a dirty, oily looking stain. And you need to use a very fine brush when you're doing that, such as this one right here. You can take a look at these hinges and see where I applied the pen wash to them to give them kind of a dirty look as well. I also used a rust-colored pen wash. There it is right there. And I applied that on different parts of the tank to give kind of a rusty look, as if it had been, you know, like in a winter battle and they'd gotten a lot of snow and rain on the top of the tank and underside of the tank, and it had just rusted over the winter. This jack assembly right there in the middle of the screen gives a good example of how those rust effects add some realism, definitely. When you use that pen wash, you need just a very tiny bit of it. You can see where I've got some leftover here in this metal tray. And just getting just a tiny little bit of water on the edge of your brush, and then just getting just a tiny bit of that pigment, so tiny. You see how that works there? And then you use just that tiny little bit to apply it to different parts of the tank. And it'll really come out looking very realistic if you just have the discipline to use a very small, very diluted amount of that pigment as it comes out of the bottle there. I also added in these cables. There were some plastic cables that came with the tank model, and I chipped them up and added some rust to them in the back here. But I added another cable going from the back to the front of the tank on both sides. And the eyelets came with the model kit, and I had to, paint those and chip them up with some silver paint. But then I painted just some kite string black, and that's what the cable running between the two eyelets is. You may notice how the tank is kind of on a tilt here, and that's because I haven't put the road wheels on this side here. And there they are. You can see how I have kind of weathered those and rusted out parts of them with that pin wash. I used some wood colored paint on the handles of the axe and the shovel that came with the kit, and a little bit of rust added to the blades of those utensils. There is the eyelet for the other cable, and there's some wire cutters there, and I painted the handles of those kind of a brownish color and then silver for the metal parts, and add a little bit of rust to those there as well. On the bottom of the tank, I put these rust smears to kind of simulate that the tank had been, driving through the rain and mud and snow. And this is the result of that, these streaked areas of rust. There would be a lot more rust underneath the tank and in the road wheel assemblies than there would be probably on top of the tank. These are the spare tracks that will be mounted on the side of the tank, and I weathered those and chipped them up and added some rust stains to those as well. I plan to do similar weathering with the main tracks. I've already painted these a flat black and then went through and added some of that rust wash that gives it that tint. But I'm going to add some other pigments to these as well. When I get through doing that, I'll come back and show you the finished product for the main tracks for the tank. So let me get started on that. And we're just about through with weathering this tank. And after I get through with the tracks, I'll be right back. I have just about finished weathering the tracks. Last time you saw these, they were painted with a flat black acrylic paint with just a real light coating of a kind of a reddish rust. And what I've come back and done now is I have added in a couple of other shades of rust paint, acrylic rust paints, and a little bit of deck tan, very diluted deck tan acrylic paint. And that deck tan kind of creates a dusty kind of a look to it. And I just kept blending those in, one on top of another, of different layers. And you don't just come through and like use, let's say that one color right there, the orange rust there, and say, okay, well, I'm all done with that. No, you actually put this on, and then you put this on, and then this one, then this one, then you come back to this one. You just keep going back and forth, putting these different layers on, one on top of each other over and over again. And of course, it's not consistent. You come along with a brush. You can target certain areas if you want, but a lot of times I was using this brush here, and I pretty much would just come along and just, pretty much just about this speed right here with one of those pigments all the way down the track and then move on to the next one. And that produced this kind of a splotchy looking different bunch of colors and shades, some being rust, some being black, some being kind of a dusty gray. This is what the other side of the tracks looks like. And again, very realistic compared to just, those black plastic tracks that come out of the box once you paint those. These are the black plastic tracks that came with the model. Yeah. But I found that there was one other step, and I learned about this online as well. And that is, after you have created this patchwork of colors, what you do next is you take pigments. And I ordered these pigments online. And what these are, these are the same pigments that go into paints and stuff, but it's basically dirt is what it is. And it says natural mineral pigments there, okay? And they come in different colors. Here they are. And it kind of looks like dirt, but it's very fine powder. And what you can do is you can take a bristle brush, such as this one here, and get that pigment on the edge of that bristle brush. It'll pick up, see, a pretty good amount of it there. And then you can come back and start working that powder into the tracks. And you can see where I've already done that on the other set of tracks. That's what all this brownish pigment color is that's on here. And here those are. And what that does is, after you go through with those pigment powders and rub them in, it blends together all of these streaks, which, they don't look bad right now, but, it doesn't look like anything that you would see in the real world on a tank, really, But by using those pigments and rubbing them in with that bristle brush, the full length of the track, it comes out looking like this, which is much more realistic as far as worn tracks that have been rusted. This is the other side of them here. And using that bristle brush, as you rub kind of hard on the top surface of each of these little tracks here, you can see how it kind of scratches and shows the bare metal that would be underneath there, although this is plastic, of course, and very realistic looking. You can also see where some of that pigment is actually stuck in the track, almost like dirt and powder. See that? Very realistic, like it's been going through, a dirty field and sand and crud. But the main thing is the look, the metal, rusted, worn, but uniform look. Where this look over here, which I haven't, put the pigments on this track, a little bit kind of a different looking look. But once I rub those pigments in, it'll come back looking like this. Very pleased with the outcome, very realistic. And you don't have to use anything that will like attach those pigments, because it's just a dusty powder here. So you would think, if you put that on there, it's just going to come, it's just going to get dust all over the place. But what I found was after you rub it in very well and shake it off, whatever remains in the tracks themselves will stay in there. It's like you forced it in to the little nooks and crannies, and you don't have to worry about it coming out. So real pleased with the way these tracks turned out for, you know, my first attempt at weathering tank tracks. Yeah. Lots of videos online that'll kind of show you, you know, how to do this different ways. But for the most part, it's just what I showed you. You paint them flat black, then you put on a kind of a reddish rust wash, then come back and kind of target different areas with those different colors, as it's been done here, layering them on in different ways. And you can be kind of sloppy, you know, during this stage, because when you come back and rub in the pigment over all of this, it will come out looking like this. So what I'm going to do now is finish rubbing the pigments in the other set of tracks right here. And I will put the tracks on the tank model. And then I'll be back to kind of wrap up this video. I finished weathering the other set of tracks by putting that brown and yellow pigment into the tracks and rubbing it in with a bristle brush. And it had the same effects as it did on the first set of tracks. So came out looking very good. Very pleased. Especially since this was my first attempt at weathering tank tracks. On past models, I've just simply taken the black plastic tracks, just as they are right out of the box, and stuck them on the model, just like that. But you can see these look quite different once they've been weathered. And if you look closely, you'll be able to see a little bit of each of those various pigments that I talked about in the last segment that were layered in on top of each other somewhat randomly. And you can also see the dust and dirt from those pigments that I brushed in as well. And the effect of the kind of a steel metal look on the very bottom of the tracks, like if they had been run across rocks and things, came out well too. So, not much left. What I plan to do now is, of course, put the top of the tank onto the chassis, and we will fasten that on, of course, with glue. And I will then go around the entire model and just touch up any areas that are left, and then we will wrap up this video.